Hello and welcome to Towards Health, an H1 podcast. I'm Elizabeth Fennell, the Director of Marketing for H1. We're lucky to have with us today Brad Hightower and Dr. Darshan Kulkarni, discussing the year in pharma. That's a really big topic. We have a lot of things to cover in a short amount of time, so we're going to dig right in. First of all, can you both tell me a little bit about yourselves? Brad, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me on, Elizabeth. Appreciate that. I'm Brad Hightower. I've essentially spent my career working at the clinical trial site level for the last 15 years, kind of working across different types of site models, everywhere from academia, nonprofit. And about 5 years ago, I started my own sort of integrated site network in which we provide research infrastructure to physicians, basically at no cost, so that we can enable more physicians to participate in research.
My name is Darshan Kulkarni. I am, by training, I'm a pharmacist. I'm an attorney. I also have a master's in quality assurance and regulatory affairs. I'm principal attorney at the Kulkarni law firm. So I help individuals and companies who are in the life sciences, everything from drug companies, device companies, and the service providers, including sites and CROs and sponsors themselves. I also, depending on the type of role, I might actually be helping in promotional compliance as well, and medical affairs as well, because I understand, Elizabeth, that is part of the audience. I was recently director of compliance for FactMI. I teach FDA regulatory law at Drexel University School of Law. I have my own podcast, Darshantalks, which focuses on life sciences considerations, including research, marketing, and advertising as well. I also have written multiple book chapters and articles relating to the life sciences, including some on clinical research, on marketing, on compliance, etc. But I'm sure there's more, and we can get into that if necessary.
Awesome. You both make me feel very unaccomplished, but I'm so glad to have you here. So when you think about 2022, we've been coming out of a pandemic and maybe going into another one, what do you think was the biggest aha moment this past year for pharma or life sciences, each to your respective areas of expertise? Brad, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think, and keep in mind my perspective is fairly narrow in terms of just clinical trials, but I think that a very sort of popular refrain has been not going back or never going back after this pandemic in terms of decentralizing trials. I'm sure we'll touch some more on that a little bit, but frankly, I think what we've seen this last year is a big sort of movement back. We're seeing more on-site visits. We're seeing less use of some of these decentralized trial technologies, maybe not technologies, but let's say services or methods. So I think, I don't know if you want to call that an aha moment, but I think it was maybe something a little bit unexpected in an environment where there was such a push. And I think that's been a really interesting thing to see over this last year.
Great. Darshan?
Well, I guess I'm going to break it up into three major buckets depending on your audience. I think I'm going to echo exactly what Brad said, which is I think you're starting to see more issues associated with innovation. So you're going to see, you have been seeing everything from privacy issues of how are companies going to work with patients directly. I think that you're seeing a lot more patient centricity pop up, but patient centricity is taking on different names. And one of those names, as Brad mentioned a few seconds ago, is decentralized clinical trials, because they are considered to be, depending on what actually lands up being decentralized clinical trials, because I'm not sure, I'm not convinced yet that I even know what that means yet. But to the extent I understand it, I think that it is a very patient-centric movement, the idea of using maybe more remote tools. And maybe we're seeing new players come into the space. So whether you talk about Walgreens, you talk about CVS, all saying that we want to be in the space. Still unclear in what capacity, because you're seeing them being in the role of recruitment, but I'm not convinced that that's their final form. To quote Dragon Ball Z, I don't think that's their final form. the I really wish I watched Dragon Ball Z. I'd probably have more to add there. I think from a promotional perspective, I think you're going to see more and more stuff come out around consistent with the label issues, because there is some considerations on what that actually means, because the FDA has put out literally about 5 years ago at this point a 67-page memo saying we don't know what to do with off-label because we've lost 6 court cases and we don't really know what to do there. Add on to that the fact that they then put out in that same 67-page memo, they put out 20, I think it's like 23 different options of what they could do, and then they kind of ended with we still don't know what to do. So that's very typical of the FDA going, you guys figure it out, we'll see where we are. I think you're seeing more direct to consumer pushes. So I'm seeing more and more social media stuff coming out. But I think companies are going to start asking better questions. I mean, we're in the middle of what I'm calling, and I say this as a pretty significant investor in some of these companies, or at least my personal significance, if you will. But in the tech sector, you're seeing a meltdown. You're seeing significant job losses right now. So you're seeing people going, I want to see an ROI on the investments I'm making. And that's not typical for pharma. And Brad, I know, is going to completely disagree with me in some senses, because he's going, I get this fair market value analysis continuously and every single day. So I don't know what you're talking about, but that's a different discussion. And I think the last piece, and I'm seeing this more and more with medical affairs, where you're seeing more and more tech enablement. So you're seeing chatbots and the like. And I think the future, and I don't think we've gotten to this question to the extent you're going to ask this question, but the future, I think, is going to be more technology interspersed. That's not just in one space and not in the others. People are talking about chatbots in medical affairs. Well, those chatbots would be great if they came into clinical research, because Brad and I have had numerous podcast interviews where he's going, I wish I had more information. And if those chatbots could be loaded to answer some of those questions that Brad has, it would make his life a whole lot easier.
And so you touched on something, and I think that's the data aggregation piece and the patient data. And I think it almost seems like pharma is where the primary care market was maybe a year and a half ago, with Walgreens and CVS getting involved in decentralized trials. So where do you see kind of data or tech innovation having the greatest impact on either drug development or clinical trials?
So I think that there are 2 different pieces. I think you're asking 2 separate questions there. The first question you're asking is, what is the role of data? And how is that going to play a bigger role? I think I deal with a lot of sponsors, for example. One of the big questions that they are asking is, do I own the data associated with the patients I'm working with? And can I give that data back to patients? And they don't know how to, because they're technically, the patients are blinded. So they don't know how to make that happen. The second element that's coming out of that is patient privacy is becoming a bigger and bigger issue, because you start talking about the EMA, you're talking about, well, technically these subjects are supposed to be anonymized and you've got to put this data out there because of clinical trial transparency rules. But turns out it's really easy to identify someone if you really wanted to. So how do you connect those 2 pieces? I think another element is, how are new players going to affect this? And I'm going to be a little bit more provocative and say that I think that a lot of the new players coming in are coming in without a clear plan, or at least a clear plan that's been that's been sort of told to the rest of the world. Because what I'm seeing is, you're seeing, I say this as a pharmacist who's worked at some of these large pharmacies. And I can tell you that right now pharmacists are overworked. They're all saying, I'd rather not work and rather not have a job than go there and do what I was doing before. So you're telling me that those pharmacists are now going to work and do all these new things that they bluntly aren't qualified to do. They've never been trained on clinical research. So we're talking about this space that requires all new training, all new equipment, and a whole new skill set that needs to be updated on a routine basis. and there's no clear plan on how they see an ROI on any of it. And to me, whether you're talking about Walgreens, you're talking about CVS, you're talking about Walmart, I don't have a clear idea of what that is and how they're going to come in and actually change the world. You'd add on an Amazon, and you see things like Haven, which has failed miserably before. Like,
Right.
you don't really know, do they have a clear plan either? It's sort of this cool area to be in, except as Brad will tell you, it's a grind. And I'm not sure people are ready for the grind of what that looks like on a day-to-day basis. So, Brad?
Yeah, I mean, I know we kind of got away from your original question there, but
Okay.
I find the whole entrance of retail to be just incredibly fascinating to me, because and I've had conversations with some of these people, at conferences or even in Zoom calls, whatever the case may be. And I can't figure out what the hell they're doing, to be perfectly honest. And I feel like they start to give me the investor pitch, and I'm like, no. I do this every day. So, tell me, or can you tell me, like, what exactly is your plan here? What do you plan to do? And, to Darshan's point, I don't think that's clear. And I'm not sure that it's even clear to them at this point. But again, it's hot place to be. There's a lot of cool acronyms, there's a lot of money getting thrown around. So, I guess they'll figure something out. I'm sure of it, but I'm not sure that that's quite clear yet.
I'm going to challenge you on that, Brad. I'm not sure they'll figure something out. I have a feeling this is going to be one of those situations where they're going to go, we tried, this wasn't a good place, and I'll move out. Eventually, I think there'll be a new plan that comes out of this. But I think we're going to see a lot of failures before you see the success.
Yeah, I mean, undoubtedly. And I think to go back to the sort of data part of your question too, like I feel like there's a great opportunity here, I think, for these groups. They have a ton of data, no question. They have more data than I as a site could even imagine in all of my dreams. So, I don't know why we wouldn't see some, community partnerships between community sites or site networks along with these retail who have the data, work with us who know how to actually make things happen on the ground. It seems like there's a good space there, but I haven't heard that really being bandied about much.
And I'll tell you the answer to that as well, Brad, because I tell you, working as a pharmacist, I never know what my patient's in for. I have a general sense that this XYZ drug can be used for one of 15 different conditions, one of which is on label, 14 of which are off label, and that's completely legitimate. So I know that I have 15,000 patients who get XYZ drugs. What I do not have clarity on is what actual disease states you have. So I don't understand from a clinical research standpoint, someone comes in and says, can you tell me how many patients you have, how many patients have XYZ disease? I couldn't tell you that. I don't know how to, because even if I'm getting something like gabapentin, which one might argue is very clearly a anti-seizure medication, yeah, except it's also used for diabetic neuropathy. It's also used for headaches. I mean, there are a bunch of different other reasons. So you have data, but the data is not clear. It's sort of this, unless you connect it to someone's EHR system, it's not as great as one would think. So I think companies are starting to discover that, and that's just not been communicated. But I'm being more provocative than I probably should be. I've had these conversations behind closed doors, and my podcast guests usually, after I turn off the podcast, will have this conversation with me, but I have nothing to lose.
And I think it definitely puts a different burden on the pharmacist. But I wonder if some of these retail pharmacies having physical locations and communities where maybe there's not access to trials. And I know that's been a big push this year. The FDA released the guidelines on trial diversity. Curious what your thoughts are. It's kind of a segue into, everyone talks about making the trials more diverse. How does that really play out?
You want to go, Brad?
Yeah. I mean, frankly, at a site level, it's a weird position to be in, because I feel like the opportunities exist for us to go into communities. Well, not necessarily to go in, but make relationships with communities where we know patients are, with doctors that are trusted. And I think that is not being leveraged enough. But as sites, look, it's no secret that sites aren't necessarily balling out with all the money in the world to go market to different communities and spend a lot of time. And not that they have to, but it's, a lot of times you're just trying to enroll the patients that are in front of you. But I think the key potentially could be through sites and existing site networks who, again, know how to do these things. But again, in some ways, we're sort of, handcuffed because there's not been any real investment from, outside. And I don't know that there should be. It's hard to say. I think that's another discussion perhaps. But if we really want to get it done, it's going to take, I think, collaboration across the board. And I just don't know that we've seen that. We're having a lot of conversations about it, but I haven't seen a lot of practical change other than sponsors saying,
we need to be
what's the diversity, or, what's your demographics of your site? And I'm like, well, I can't, it is what it is.
Yeah.
I'm going to repeat back the question because I have a terrible memory, Elizabeth, so I apologize. But I think the question you asked is, do you think that these new players are going to change the diversity profile of your clinical trials? Is that a fair recap?
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I think there's more attention on the diversity because the FDA released the guidelines. So yeah, that's a fair question.
Okay, so I think my response to that would be, I think at this moment, both the FDA, quite bluntly, and sponsors are paying lip service to the idea of diversity. Mm-hmm. Everyone wants diversity as long as it doesn't take more effort to do it. And the question is, well, it's a new idea. It's a new program. It's going to take more effort. It's going to take more money, and it may slow down progress while we figure these things out. Any CRO that's coming out there that's saying, oh, we can get you a more diverse set of patients, I don't know how you're going to do that, because if you could do that before, why didn't you do it before? Diversity has always been something that you want in a clinical trial. I think sites are, as Brad said a few seconds ago, I have what I have. I can't change the diversity. If I'm in a primarily Hispanic region, that's the population I have. And you probably should be talking to that population because that might not be the population you have in your trial. On the other hand, if you are in rural Kansas, you have a primarily white population. That's the population you have. You can't change that population because suddenly there's this goal for diversity. Having said that, I do think diversity comes in different forms. I just did an interview with someone around trans health and the inclusion of trans individuals. Maybe your inclusion-exclusion criteria need to evolve. So if you want diversity, maybe it doesn't start by saying men and women. There are more ways to express that. And did you really lose anything by saying individuals over the age of whatever? So that type of inclusive language would be very useful, because otherwise you're stuck with sort of criterion that may cause you to reject people that should have been included. And quite bluntly, you might even be able to get, depending on the type of study you do and the like, you might be able to get a rare disease state voucher out of it. And that's worth more than a lot of different, it's worth a lot of money. But people aren't going down that path. People aren't thinking about these issues. Sorry, I'm being a little provocative.
No, that's okay. I've recently heard the term social determinants has been thrown around healthcare a lot, but I've recently heard it in relation to the decentralized trials. I was curious what either of yours opinion was on that. If it understanding those data points for patients that we're trying to enroll makes a difference in where we try to enroll trials, or if we do decentralized trials.
You want to go, Brad? You want me to go first?
No, please go ahead.
So again, I feel like social determinants of health are one of those. It's sort of like that term of diversity, which is, well, actually, it's more closer to decentralized clinical trials than to diversity. Diversity is aspirational, but at least I know what it means. Decentralized clinical trials, I don't actually even know what it means. I know there's a definition out there, and I know people like Craig Lipset have done a wonderful job trying to spread the word around it, but I'm still unclear what it actually means. Having said that, with something like social determinants of health, it's one of those things that's very amorphous, and people are still doing research on what the actual social determinants of health are. It's everything from poverty to zip codes to everything else. I mean, everything affects who you are, whether it's food deserts, whether it's pharmacy access. I mean, all this plays a role. So the question then becomes, what are you actually going to control for? If you say we're going to consider social determinants of health, okay, where do you start? Which determinants are you going to control for?
Right.
So that'd be my take.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have much to add, really. Again, I find it in a lot of ways, to his point, just as sort of nebulous as decentralized trials. Like, what are we talking about here? I get the general idea, but to what degree? Again, to what degree do you control, and why? That, again, site level. That's kind of stuff's not really that clear to us.
Yeah, it sort of becomes, when does it become aspirational and when does it become boots on the ground to actually be able to use it? So we are almost at wrap up time. Maybe we can do a part 2 of this because I love this discussion. So we'll wrap up with, what are you most excited about for 2023 when it comes to either innovations or your space or developments in drug therapies?
Oh, I'm really excited about social determinants of health and decentralized clinical trials. I'm really excited about how technology is going to change everything we do.
It's going to solve everything next year, January 1.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I know we've been, and I've been often critical of all of these things, but I do still, again, find them extremely exciting to watch kind of play out in real time, as somebody who is sort of the boots on the ground, having to actually do the work, that's being being decided for us, at these higher levels. So I'm looking forward to seeing how, I guess, what fails and what works at this point, because I think we're still in that sort of early uncertain phase. So I think it is very exciting. Now, I am also incredibly fearful of all the extra time, energy, uh, you know, to what degree some of these things fail and what effect that may have. But I still find it to be, again, just extremely exciting looking forward.
Great. Darshan, anything to close out?
No, I think I let wisdom speak, and Brad was wise.
Well, we thank you both for taking the time to be on. And if you both want to give a plug for your podcast, that would be awesome. Brad, what's the name of yours?
It's Note to File Podcast, and check it out at notetofilepodcast.com. It's on every platform there is at this point. So
Awesome. Darshan?
My podcast is called Darshantalks. I'm actually primarily on YouTube, so I probably should do more podcasting. I took it off the podcast channels, but I primarily do YouTube.
Awesome. Well, this is Towards Health, an H1 podcast, and we thank our guests, Brad Hightower and Dr. Darshan Kulkarni, and we'll see you next time.